83 days. That's how long Aaron Judge has been completely erased from the Yankees lineup. No swings. No games. No answers, for weeks at a time, about whether their captain, their three-time MVP, the single most important bat in that entire clubhouse, would ever take the field again in 2026. And then, this week, in Baltimore, something finally changed. A bat. A tee. A quiet, unremarkable-looking drill that most fans would scroll right past on social media, except this one single moment is now being called, by people inside that organization, the true final test standing between Aaron Judge and a real return this season. Get this wrong, and the season is effectively over for him. Get it right, and the entire American League playoff picture shifts overnight. Stick with me, because what happens over these next few days might end up deciding this entire Yankees season. Before we break down exactly what this final test actually involves, what the Yankees have said about it, and just how close Judge really is, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there's a very specific detail about his recovery timeline coming up that changes everything about how soon he could actually be back. Let's start with the injury itself, because understanding exactly what Judge has been fighting through this entire summer is essential to understanding why this current step matters so much. Judge hasn't played a single game since May 31st, when discomfort in his right side was eventually diagnosed as a stress fracture in his right first rib. At the time he went down, he wasn't just playing well, he was playing like an MVP frontrunner, hitting .248 with an OPS pushing 900, 17 home runs and 38 runs batted in across just 59 games. This wasn't a slumping veteran quietly nursing an injury on the way out the door. This was arguably the best hitter in baseball, in the middle of an MVP-caliber season, getting completely shut down overnight. The recovery process that followed has been anything but smooth. He landed on the 10-day injured list initially, but by mid-July, with healing still incomplete, the Yankees made the far more serious move of transferring him to the 60-day injured list, a clear signal that this wasn't going to resolve itself quickly. Imaging throughout early August continued to show only partial healing, forcing Judge into a frustratingly limited routine, neck work, lower body training, anything that didn't put stress on that healing rib, while the calendar kept ticking and Yankees fans kept waiting for any real sign of progress. At one particularly bleak stretch of that recovery, general manager Brian Cashman was even asked directly whether missing the entire rest of the season was a realistic possibility, and rather than dismiss the question, he engaged with it honestly, acknowledging that outcome couldn't be ruled out completely, even while stressing the organization's genuine optimism that Judge would find his way back. But over these last 2 weeks, that tone has shifted dramatically, and it's happened in carefully documented stages. First came clearance for outdoor running and light upper body resistance work, the first real physical green light of this entire ordeal. Then, during the Yankees' most recent series up in Toronto, Judge was seen playing catch again for the first time since the injury occurred, a milestone significant enough that manager Aaron Boone finally floated an actual, if unofficial, return window, suggesting Judge could realistically be back in the lineup in roughly a month's time. Boone even revealed that Judge had been doing what he called swing-related work in the pool during this stretch, a low-impact way of reintroducing rotational movement back into his body before ever picking up an actual bat. And then came this week's genuinely exciting update. Judge has officially begun hitting off a tee at Yankee Stadium, marking the very first time he's swung a bat in a real training context since that injury occurred back in May. Boone confirmed it personally, saying it seemed to be going well, and that the plan was simply to keep evaluating how Judge's body responded day by day. This is the moment insiders are now referring to as Judge's actual final test. Not because tee work itself is physically demanding, it isn't, but because this is the exact stage of recovery where problems tend to reveal themselves. Once real rotational stress gets reintroduced into a rib that's been healing for nearly 3 months, any lingering weakness, any incomplete healing that imaging alone couldn't fully capture, tends to show up almost immediately in how the body actually responds to live swings. That's exactly why the tone from people covering this recovery closely has remained so carefully cautious, even amid all the recent good news. One widely read Yankees insider put it about as bluntly as possible, calling this stretch the true final frontier of the entire recovery. If Judge can get through these initial stages of hitting reintroduction cleanly, there's real, legitimate hope not just for a return this season, but for enough time afterward to actually round back into form before games start mattering in October. But if he hits any kind of setback here, during this specific phase, that same insider warned it could effectively be curtains for his season entirely. That's the tightrope this entire recovery is walking right now, no margin for error, every single day treated as a genuine checkpoint. So what would a clean path forward actually look like from here? Based on how these recoveries typically progress, hitting off a tee is usually followed by soft toss, then batting practice against a coach or machine, gradually increasing both the speed and the unpredictability of what Judge is swinging at. From there, assuming no setbacks along the way, the logical next step becomes live batting practice against an actual pitcher, followed by what would likely be some kind of minor league rehab assignment, allowing him to face real, life pitching in game conditions before ever stepping back into a major league box score. Given how much time and game action Judge has already missed, insiders around the organization have suggested that rehab assignment could end up being a genuinely lengthy one, not just a quick, symbolic tune-up, simply because there's so much rust to shake off after nearly 3 full months away from competitive baseball. Multiple people close to this situation have pointed toward a September target for an actual, official return to the Yankees lineup, assuming Judge continues progressing at a normal pace from here. That timeline lines up almost perfectly with Boone's own vague, month-out estimate from a couple weeks ago, and it would still leave Judge several weeks to knock off rust and find his timing before the stretch run turns into the postseason push that this entire Yankees roster is built around. And here's why the stakes attached to all of this go so far beyond just one player's personal comeback story. This Yankees offense has genuinely struggled for stretches this season without their captain in the lineup, and Judge isn't walking back into an empty room either. Cody Bellinger has also been progressing in his own recovery, and Giancarlo Stanton has been trending in a positive direction as well. If all three of those bats end up returning to full health around the same general window, this Yankees lineup could look almost unrecognizable compared to the version that's been grinding through the summer, transforming from a team that's had to fight for every single run into a legitimate offensive powerhouse fully capable of matching up with anyone left standing in October. Judge himself has never wavered publicly on believing he'll get back onto that field before this season ends. Weeks ago, when directly asked whether he was still confident about playing again in 2026, he didn't hesitate for a second, saying flatly that returning had always been the plan, and that the thought of the season simply ending without him never truly crossed his mind. That kind of public confidence from an 8-time All-Star and 3-time American League MVP carries real weight, especially for a fanbase that's spent months anxiously refreshing every single injury update looking for any sign of real, tangible progress. None of this comes with guarantees, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Rib injuries like this one have a well-earned reputation around the sport for behaving unpredictably, especially once rotational stress gets reintroduced through actual hitting. A single uncomfortable swing, a single lingering ache that shows up during this exact stage of the process, could realistically push this entire timeline back significantly, or in a worst-case scenario, and any realistic hope of a return this season altogether. That's precisely why this specific stretch, tee-work transitioning into soft toss and eventually live batting practice, has taken on such enormous significance inside that organization and across this entire fan base. It isn't just another item checked off a generic recovery checklist. It's the moment that will most likely determine, one way or another, whether Aaron Judge gets to play a single game for the New York Yankees in 2026. So as this stretch run continues, and as the Yankees keep clawing to stay within range of the top of the American League East, every single update on Judge's hitting progression is about to carry enormous weight. A clean week of tee work and soft toss keeps the September return timeline fully intact. Any kind of setback, however small it might initially sound, could dramatically change the entire conversation around this team's ceiling heading into the postseason. This truly is Aaron Judge's final test, and depending on how his body responds over these next several days, the entire trajectory of the Yankees season could be riding on the answer. We'll be tracking every single update on this recovery as it happens, so make sure you're subscribed for all of it, because this is about to become one of the most important storylines in all of baseball heading into the final stretch of the season. It's worth walking through just how much this recovery timeline has actually shifted over the summer, because the road to this week's encouraging tee work wasn't a straight line at all. Back in early July, Judge himself addressed his own frustration publicly, admitting before the All-Star break that while there had been some progress, the rib simply wasn't fully healed yet. That kind of honest, unvarnished update from the player himself, rather than filtered entirely through team statements, gave fans a clearer sense of just how uncertain this entire process actually was at that stage. A few days later, following another round of imaging, Cashman again addressed the situation candidly, acknowledging that while the organization remained hopeful, there were real challenges still standing in the way of a clean return. Then came a stretch in early August that genuinely tested the patience of this entire fan base. On a night where very little else went right for this Yankees team, Judge himself stepped in front of reporters and made a declaration that, looking back now, turned out to be a real turning point in how this recovery has been covered ever since. He stated flatly that he would be back this season, that the plan had always been to return sooner rather than later, and that not playing again in 2026 had never once crossed his mind as a real possibility. That same day, he was cleared to begin outdoor running and some light upper body resistance work, the first tangible physical progress after weeks of frustrating uncertainty. It was a moment insiders described as the first real sign that time hadn't fully run out on this recovery, even though a full return to form remained a long way off. From there, the progression accelerated in carefully documented stages, each one treated as its own small milestone by a fan base desperate for any sign of forward momentum. Playing catch again in Toronto. Doing swing-related work in a pool to reintroduce rotational movement without full impact stress. And now, finally, standing in the batter's box at Yankee Stadium, bat in hand, taking real swings off a tee for the first time in nearly 3 months. Each of those steps individually might seem small, almost mundane, the kind of routine training milestone that would barely register for a healthy player during a normal season. But stacked together, in sequence, over the course of just the last 2 or 3 weeks, they represent genuinely significant, accelerating progress after what had been a painfully slow, uncertain summer. There's also an important structural piece of this story worth understanding, because Judge's return doesn't exist in a vacuum separate from the rest of this Yankees roster. This organization has already been managing a chaotic run of pitching injuries throughout the second half of the season, including a gut-punching setback just days ago when starter Max Fried had to return to the injured list with a recurring elbow issue, arriving on the very same day the team was celebrating Carlos Rodon's activation from his own long absence. Add Judge's potential return into that same crowded picture, and the Yankees front office is essentially managing an entire small army of significant roster decisions simultaneously, all converging around the exact same critical stretch of the calendar heading toward the postseason. That convergence actually raises the stakes on Judge's recovery even further. If the rotation continues sorting itself out while Judge, Bellinger, and Stanton all trend back toward full health at roughly the same time, this Yankees team could be assembling its most complete, most dangerous version of itself right as October baseball comes into view. But if any of those pieces stumble, particularly the health of a lineup that's already had to grind through months without its best hitter, the margin for error on this entire season narrows considerably. That's precisely why insiders covering this team have started describing this stretch of the calendar, the second half of August bleeding into early September, as genuinely pivotal for how the rest of this Yankees season plays out. There's a broader historical context worth appreciating here too. Judge has already established himself as one of the most decorated players of his generation, with 3 American League MVP awards, an AL rookie record for home runs in a single season, and a batting title from just last year alone. A player with that kind of resume missing a significant chunk of a pennant race is never just a routine roster subtraction. It's the kind of absence that shapes how an entire season gets remembered, regardless of how everything else around him unfolds. That's part of why every single incremental update on this recovery, T-work, soft toss, a rehab assignment, carries so much more emotional and competitive weight than it would for almost any other player in the sport. So as tempting as it might be to simply celebrate this week's T-work as a finish line crossed, the more accurate way to think about it is as the true starting line for the hardest, most uncertain phase of this entire recovery. Every additional day Judge spends progressing cleanly through hitting work brings this Yankees team closer to getting their most important player back for a real playoff push. Every setback, however minor it might initially sound, threatens to unravel months of careful, deliberate rehabilitation almost overnight. That tension, hope building steadily against the very real possibility of disappointment, is exactly what makes this particular stretch of the season so gripping for anyone following this team closely right now. There's also a quieter, more human dimension to this story that's easy to lose amid all the roster math and playoff projections. This is a 34-year-old player, already established as one of the greatest hitters of his generation, choosing to grind through months of frustrating, unglamorous rehabilitation work, T-drills and pool exercises and careful imaging appointments, all for a chance to help his team compete in October rather than simply shutting things down early and beginning his offseason ahead of schedule. Judge could have reasonably approached this recovery with far less urgency, given his standing in the sport and the security of his contract. Instead, by every account from inside that organization, he's approached this rehabilitation with the same relentless focus that's defined his entire career, treating a stress fracture in his rib with the same seriousness he'd bring to any other competitive challenge on a baseball field. That mentality matters heading into these final, uncertain weeks. Recoveries like this one aren't purely physical processes. Mental resilience, patience through setbacks, and a willingness to trust a slow, methodical rehabilitation plan rather than rushing back prematurely all play a real role in whether a player successfully returns to form or re-injures himself trying to speed up a process that simply can't be rushed. Everything reported about Judge's approach to this recovery so far suggests he understands that balance clearly, which is part of why so many people around this organization remain cautiously optimistic that this final test, T-work evolving into live pitching and eventually a real rehab assignment, ends with him back in pinstripes before this season is over. We'll be tracking every single update on this recovery as it happens, so make sure you're subscribed for all of it, because this is about to become one of the most important storylines in all of baseball heading into the final stretch of the season. This video is created for entertainment purposes. All information shared is based on publicly available reports, team statements, and ongoing developments as of the time of publishing, and details may change as the situation evolves. This content is intended to celebrate and discuss these athletes and organizations respectfully. No disrespect is intended toward any player, coach, or organization mentioned.